Good evening. This is 2020 Church, and I'm Pastor Larry Enriquez. Hey, I'm glad you're with me on this day, this evening, and hope that you really have gained from these three letters regarding John's commitment to the church at large in the first century. This is actually the third letter. It's just one sweet little page. One chapter, but it's like love in action. It's like everyday kind of stuff that we read here. But if we look at this as, again, the end of the first century, it gives us a snippet of what life was like in the first century church. But also it causes us to reflect on the history of the church as a whole, now some 2,000 years forward, looking back. That the history of the church is filled with false teachers and those who really are instigated by Satan to bring division, to bring a tearing of truth and a brokenness of relationships. We find that in the early church, it was full of combatants, and they tended to fight each other. It's like, terrible things we can find in the history of the church. And so I pray that as we look at history, that we learn from it, learn to be unifying factors within our church, and that we find ourselves being those who are not combative by nature, but are looking to bring unity and looking to bring peace. As we look at this last letter of John, we find that he even points out somebody who's part of this divisive factor in the first century church. So anyway, let's read it here. It's one thing I do like about this one chapter book is that you can read the whole thing and go, hey, I get a sense of continuity because I just read the whole thing. So I'm gonna read it to you by the time we're done, the whole chapter. But along the way, we'll make little stops. Now remember, this is John, the apostle, the one who wrote the gospel according to John, 1st and 2nd John, the book of Revelation. And now what we're looking at is the third letter of John. And as we look at this one who calls himself the elder, he does so because they know he's the old guy. He's the senior pastor of the church at large as a whole. And so he is lovingly called John the elder. And so we have him here. Dear Gaius, whom I truly love, is how this starts out with, at least in this version. Dear Gaius, whom I truly love. Now, I spent a little time looking at the name Gaius in the New Testament. We find that name is in various places. And I don't want to spend really much of any time looking at those characters because it may or may not be him, so it's not that important. But we do know that he's not just some guy who's just come on at the last year, but he's been in connection and involved with the birth of the early church for some time. And I do believe he's the one mentioned in the book of Acts who's at the back end of a riot and is really a person within the early church who is witnessing not just the spread of the gospel of grace, but also the attacks against the gospel, literally it being attacked by people and by politics and by religious bigots. So all of that's going on, and we get that sense of it here. So here's how it starts. To dear Gaius, or Gaius, whom I truly love, dear friend, I am praying that all is well with you and that your body is as healthy as I know that your soul is. So what a lovely sentiment there, but it's not just a sentiment. I mean, he's asking, it's part of a prayer. If I can read it here, the New International Version, to my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth. I'm reading this version too because I think it's better to read that word truth in there because truth is important to John throughout all his letters, and certainly is important to the whole biblical narrative. That truth is vital to the Christian way, and truth is God and everything that God encompasses, and truth is his word. Truth is embodied in Jesus Christ. for he is the truth. So I like that word and using that as more of a direct translation of the original language. To my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth. He's speaking about when he says I love him in the truth, it's saying in the context of our lives being in who God is in reality. So, dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health, that all may be well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. So here's what's an important part to just kind of glean from this. That in the first, second century, third century church, there's always this, and even to the day, really, but there's always a need to combat forces that want to come and make truth less than being true and make Jesus less than being the truly Messiah. And so they'll either take away his humanity or they'll take away his deity, but they're always trying to tear Jesus apart. And there are always these other philosophies, both Roman and Greek, who had different ways of looking at the human and how they dissected the human, how they dissected the reality of Christ, the various philosophies. To say that Jesus was here really is an aberration. He was here in spirit and just used the body, but he really wasn't here in body. I mean, all kinds of crazy things over the years. But this book, along with others in the Bible, gives us the clarity of the person of Jesus being fully man and fully God, and here as one who had to negotiate the fact that he was in human form. So when we have John addressing Gaius, he addresses the reality of the fullness of the human being. He says, it's important that we're spiritually and soulishly alive, but your body counts too. It's not that it doesn't matter. The body matters in the Christian life. And so it's important that we embrace the reality of resurrection. As I've said many times, if not here on Sundays, that as I get older and little things seem to remind me that we're temporary, really life is time and time is short. And little things remind us of that all the time. I was walking briskly yesterday. I walk a couple miles every day, at least lately I have been. And boy, I was just feeling good. I was walking, all of a sudden I hear a little click in my left knee, and it's like, oh my gosh. And then it's like I had to stop, and then I could barely get going again, and I couldn't go fast. I just had to limp until I could leave because it just hurt bad this morning, the swollen. Not a big deal. I'm just saying that there's always something like that. That when you think, oh, I'm so good, that something reminds us, yes, we're so good for a moment, but we're temporary. Enjoy the good. But the Bible reminds us that we're not just bodies, but we're souls. And that as our bodies, as the scripture tells us in other places, wanes, that our spirits are growing stronger as we approach heaven. And one day we'll have new bodies. Okay, so that's a little side note. So back here to 3 John, the one chapter, John now responds in this letter, or rather I shouldn't say responds, but says in the letter to Gaius, I could have no greater joy than to hear such things about my children. Now he's taking that role of a fatherly figure. He is, in fact, one translation says, John the pastor, because he has a pastoral sense of being father-like, to the degree that he says Gaius and all those whom he's writing to through this letter are his children. Let me read another little version. Again, I don't mind doing this. I hope you don't mind hearing it. Here's the word of God in this version here. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers. For I rejoiced greatly when brethren came and testified of the truth that is in you, just as you walk in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. Bringing back this version because it's important to hear that truth is vital to the way that we think and the way that we live. So John is making it clear that, wow, you're bringing such joy to me because you're not just in the truth, but you're proving it out in the way that you live out the truth. You know, sometimes in life we live out the truth that we're sinners. Sometimes in life we live out the truth that we're divisive or combative or that we're not gentle. Sometimes the truth is we're flawed. But John is, again, saying it in this place here, that he's living out the truth, the reality of being in God and trusting God and knowing God. And that as he lives out the truth that he believes, that it is a testimony to the reality of God and the transformative power he has in every believer's life. Again, we all falter, flutter, with a sometimes we take little nosedives and we got to climb up again from the fluttering and realize that God is working in us something greater, even as we are aware of our flaws. But there's no greater joy to John than he sees those that he's writing to, or rather hearing, that they're just not in the truth up here, in here, but how they live their lives. It's important to make those connections, isn't it? That we don't live in a house, in a corner, an apartment, first or second floor, or in some room added to somebody, or that we live in some place where we talk and hunker down about our Christianity, and we know the arguments against, false Christianity. We know the arguments against false philosophies, and we know the arguments against the cultural travesties that we find, and we know the arguments against fill in the blank, abortion, homosexuality, foreign affairs, whatever it may be. But if we don't live out the Christian life, it means little in many regards. Nobody ever comes to Jesus because they lost an argument against a Christian. People come to Jesus because Jesus is real, and the truth is being lived out in a life that loves them, that cares for them, that reaches out to them, that turns the other cheek. So we'll get to that. Let's get to verse 5 here. Dear friend, he continues as he's writing this letter to Gaius, and to whom he knows the church that will receive this letter eventually. Dear friend, you are doing a good work for God in taking care of the traveling teachers and missionaries who are passing through. I love that verse. It gives you a sense of the early church and the growth of the church, the sacrifice, people going out. It's like when Jesus sent them out without all of the accoutrements to make their traveling easy. He sends them out with nothing. He says, go preach the gospel. It's kind of like happening here after Christ has left. The missionaries and teachers that went out, the traveling preachers went out, and were trusting God would care for them by other believers, not non-believers. We'll talk about that in just a bit. But here's how it reads it in this passage here. Dear friend, you are faithful in what you are doing for the brothers, even though they are strangers to you. They have told the church about your love. They will do well to send them on their way in a manner worthy of God. It was for the sake of the name that they went out, receiving no help from the pagans. We ought therefore to show hospitality to such men, so that we may work together for the truth. Here's a little picture of the early church. People went out to do the work of ministry, to share the gospel, to share the resurrected Jesus. They went out trusting that God would provide for them through other believers. They were out there in a rugged world, in a dangerous world, sacrificially giving their lives to the proclamation of the truth, traveling. Now, it wasn't for everybody to do that, but it was for everybody to participate in the work of the gospel, so that it meant that those behind the scenes were as vital as those who are up front on the stage. Let's just call the stage the traveling teachers. Those ministering the gospel, that's the stage. Behind the scenes are those who are contributing financially, or at least agriculturally, for them to survive. They're feeding them, they're clothing them, they're giving them a place to sleep. And they're just as valuable as those on the stage. You know, I'm a musician of sorts, and over the years I realized fully that if I'm writing a song and or playing a song or recording a song or on a stage with a band, that those things are only possible because there are wonderful people greater and better than me putting that stuff together, putting it through something so that people can hear it, adding something to it so that it's better than it really is. And so there's this behind the scene work that is taking place. And it's vital in the church too, in the early church, to understand that reality as it's going forward. There are those behind the scenes doing the work of the gospel as those who are going out in front, preaching and teaching it. Dear friend, you are doing a good work for God and taking care of traveling teachers and missionaries who are passing through. They have told the church here of your friendship and of your loving deeds. I am glad when you send them on their way with a generous gift. For they are traveling for the Lord and take neither food nor clothing nor shelter nor money from those who are not Christians, even though they have preached to them. It's interesting that in this day and age, as I hear radio personalities, teachers, pastors, I appreciate them. There's some very good ones out there and some not so, in my opinion, and I don't always get a chance to hear them because of the nature of my own life. But periodically I'll get to hear one. But there's always that thing at the end, the tag at the end, please give to the ministry, so we can keep going over the radio. And I'm thinking, that's never sat well with me. I've always felt like, no, your sermons are developed because the church is paying you to develop those sermons or those teachings. And the church wants this ministry to go forth through the radio, so have the Christians within that church pay for it. Quit asking those people out there in La La Land to pay for it when maybe many of them aren't even believers. You pay for it. Have your church pay for it. That's what we do. Now, it's important because I think that the church has to decide whether it wants to send people out or not. And if the radio is a way of sending people out, then it's very akin to this. Have the believers, have the church fortify that financially, or however it needs to be fortified. So anyway, that's my opinion, and I'll stamp it to this verse here. In fact, there used to be a time we would take offering in our church, and we would regularly say, if you're a believer and you're visiting here, please don't give. It's not for you. It's for believers. We tithe, we give of our belongings to the Lord's work because we belong to Him, and what we have isn't our own. And we would invite non-believers visiting not to give. And some things have changed how we do that through COVID, but I want to bring that back. The fact is, we're asking believers to support what God is doing. I'd like to say, too, that John makes it clear to Gaius you make faith visible by the way that you live your lives. Think about that just for a moment. Do we make our faith visible by the way that we live our lives? Speaking truth, living truth. So in verse 8, so we ourselves should take care of them in order that we may become partners with them in the Lord's work. There's that reality of the fact that whether you're behind the scenes or in the front scene, whether you're on the stage or behind the stage, that it's equally important in God's work. It reminds me of the metaphor of the body that the scripture gives us regarding the value of the body of Christ, that it's like a body, the way it works, that every part is important. Some parts are more visible than others, but they're all equally important. So let's read on here. I sent a brief letter to the church about this, but proud Diotrephes, now I'll say it before I read it, he's going to call out a bad guy. A guy who's in the church and doing inappropriate things. He's a bad teacher. He's a counterfeit teacher, and he calls him out by name. So in the Bible, Diotrephes, his name is here, and it's too bad. But here's what it says. Are you ready? So we ourselves should take care of them in order that we may become partners with them in the Lord's work, that is, the missionaries and teachers that are traveling. I sent a brief letter to the church about this, but proud Diotrephes, he gives a clue to Diotrephes' sin, the sin of pride. But proud Diotrephes, who loves to push himself forward as the leader of the Christians there, does not admit my authority over him and refuses to listen to me. Every man is under every woman is under someone's authority. We're all under someone's authority. Ultimately, we're all under God's authority. I happen to be the senior pastor of this church, but I'm under the authority of a board of directors who oversees that. And they're under my authority as a pastor who pastors them. I'm under the authority of the body here in the sense that I answer to them. And they're under my authority as a pastor who shepherds them. So there must be this reality of being under for us to be effective for God's work. May we understand the reality of pride and our need to lead as some kind of itch is being inappropriate. Lead because God is calling you to. Lead because God has gifted you to. Lead because that's where your life is at this time because God has put you there. Don't lead because you need to be in power. It's a terrible place to be, that somehow I need to be in control or in power. Now, when God puts us as leaders or you as a leader in whatever capacity you may be leading, God has put you there to humbly lead and direct for the benefit of those who you happen to be in front of, or in one sense behind, pushing and encouraging. But pride is a terrible thing that we all have to deal with, especially in our day and age, where it seems that this great need for humans to rule other humans is becoming more and more prevalent in our divisive age. It's always been here. It's just changing in our direction, in our neck of the woods. So it goes on to say, when I come, I will tell you some of the things he is doing and what wicked things he is saying about me and what insulting language he is using. He not only refuses to welcome the missionary travelers himself, but tells others not to. And when they do, he tries to put them out of the church, or he's excommunicating people from their local church if they don't do what he says, if they don't accept the apostles of Jesus, in particular here, the Apostle John. So John publicly rebukes this guy by name, and it isn't outside of John being a loving brother, but in love wants to make sure that they know who this guy's protecting the flock, but also that maybe it would have an effect of this particular brother or false brother to have a change of heart. Dear friend, don't let this bad example influence you. Follow only what is good. Remember that those who do what is right prove that they are God's children, and those who continue to do evil prove that they are far from God. But everyone, including truth itself, speaks highly of Demetrius. I myself can say the same for him, and you know I speak the truth. I have much to say, but I don't want to write it, for I hope to see you soon, and then we will have much to talk about together. So goodbye for now. Friends here send their love to you. And please give each of the folks there a special greeting from me sincerely, John. What a beautiful little practical letter. May it bless you, encourage you. May it fill us with truth and another way of how we're to live our lives for the glory of God. Well, God bless you. I love you. Hope to see you this Sunday in church. Go in peace.